Friends, legends, countrymen, lend me your ears. If you've read this far, you have finished Act 3, and you are in Act 3, Scene 2 in particular. You've already witnessed the murder of Julius Caesar, which takes us to Act 3, Scene 2, which takes place at the Forum. Now, a quick summary of this. We're going to analyze two speeches, and one of the speeches is by Marcus Brutus, and his is kind of lame. It has a lot of parallel structure, and it's very scholarly in tone, but it's also logical fallacy laden. So we're going to go through that. And then, of course, who follows up is Mark Antony gives a speech, and his is way better. And his is way better because he uses emotional appeals, and he goes through a very long narrative about how awesome Caesar was. And he uses a whole bunch of verbal irony, which I love verbal irony because I use it all the time. That's why I'm the greatest teacher in the world. So with that said, that was verbal irony in case anybody was paying attention. So if you have gotten to this, we have been working on these things called logical fallacies and appeals, intended audience, emotional appeals, ethical appeals, logical appeals, compare, contrast, all that stuff. So in the previous video I made was about the logical fallacies that the conspirators had actually used when they were justifying why they just killed Caesar, especially my favorite, that circular logic. Yeah, death is coming someday, so let's kill Caesar. That way he doesn't have to fear death anymore. And that's why we're his friends. We did him a favor. He no longer has to fear death because he's good and dead. I like that kind of circular logic. But in either case, when we get to Act 3, Scene 2, let's focus on Brutus's speech. There's a few examples here, and there's a couple of things. And when I show the number 2 right here and the number 2 right here, that means there's at least 2 elements there that I want to be able to label. So in his speech, Brutus asks the following question. He said, "Had you rather Caesar were living and die all slaves than Caesar were dead and to live all free men?" In other words, Brutus characterizes the situation that if Caesar were living, you'd all be slaves. However, now that Caesar is dead, you're all free men. And that's a logical fallacy to say it's either this way or it's that way, and not in a very creative way. This is a good example of the either or fallacy. But it's also another rhetorical problem too, because Caesar living and die and that he was dead or that we live all free. This is another example of what is called parallel structure. And in particular, too, you could even reason that this is compare and contrast, because we're comparing and contrasting two different, I should probably spell contrast correctly. We're comparing the elements of two very different things here. The question that you got to fill out, though, is why would Brutus say that? What is his intent of saying, had you rather that Caesar were living and die all slaves than that Caesar were dead to live all free men? Which then brings us to the next element here, the next part of his speech. And this is why it's more scholarly, okay? And I'm going to read it aloud. As Caesar loved me, I weep for him. I need to put my mark up. As he loved me, I weep for him. As he was fortunate, I rejoice at it. As he was valiant, I honor him. But as he was ambitious, I slew him. So what you have here is parallel structure that is known as anti-metaboly. And I'm going to just label it parallel structure. However, if you want to go get an A in your AP Language and Composition class, you'll also recognize it as anti-metaboly. And what it is basically they take a series of parallel sentences and then you flip the last one so that it fits your rhetorical purpose. A good example of this is ask what you can do for your country and ask not what your country can do for you. That's anti-metaboly because it's parallel structure, but then they flip it. So here we go. As he loved me, I weep for him. As he was fortunate, I rejoice at it. As he was valiant, I honor him. But as he was ambitious, stabbed him, slew him. So that's a good example of parallel structure. Now that continues in this too. There is tears for his love, joy for his fortune, honor for his valor, and death for his ambition. So once again, you have another example of parallel structure and another anti-metaboly. So with that said, this is also the kind of language that is being used here is also considered an emotional and a logical appeal. So he's really trying to prove his point about why it was the right thing to kill Caesar. And he uses this parallel structure and this sing-song pattern to do it, which makes it kind of logical, even though it really isn't. That said, then, here's the last one. And in fact, this is just as good today as it was back then. But this is he asked the question, who is here so base that would be a bondman? Like who in here is so low that they would put everybody in prison? If any speak, for him have I offended. Who is here so rude that would not be a Roman? If any speak, for him have I offended. Who is here so vile that will not love his country? Well, there's a couple of things here. The first one is you couldn't help but notice there's parallel structure. Who is here so base? It would be a question mark. If any speak, for him have I offended. Who is here so rude that would not be a Roman? Question mark. If any speak, for him have I offended. Right? So what we have here is another example of parallel structure. But we also have the logical fallacy known as the either or fallacy. And in particular, if you don't support what we did, you must not love Rome. And that is what is known as the emotional appeal, in particular to patriotism. Questionable patriotism, but patriotism nonetheless. And in fact, you actually see that in political discourse today. All you need to do is watch any video of a Trump rally and you'll see some of these things playing out. So nonetheless, Brutus's speech here involves these kind of rhetorical elements. What I need for you to fill out is why would he say these things? What is his purpose? What is his effect on the crowd? The other part is you probably notice that the plebeians buy into it. They're like, oh, yeah. What Brutus is saying is so cool. I agree with it. So that's the first lesson with regard to the rhetorical structures in this. In the next video, I'm going to work through Mark Antony's speech to the plebeians. All right.